Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the aftermath of South Korea's failed coup.
Thousands of South Koreans are gathering in Seoul for rival demonstrations as investigators prepare another attempt to arrest Yoon over his short-lived martial law decree.
As President Yoon Suk-yeol's trial kicked off, the leader was holed up at his residence. What's behind the showdown? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. While we were putting this episode together, things suddenly took a sharp turn in South Korea.
We start in Seoul, where the suspended South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has finally been arrested over his short-lived martial law declaration in December.
So, how did we end up here? I chatted with my guest just hours before it all unfolded.
My name is Se-Woong Koo. I am journalist and founder of Korea Exposé, joining you from Germany.
So, Se-Woong, welcome to The Take. Somehow, the drama in South Korea has actually increased since we last had you on the show last month. So let's just do a quick recap. Late in the evening of December 3rd, the conservative president Yoon shocked everyone by declaring martial law, basically suspending democracy on national security grounds.
Dear
citizens, I hereby declare an emergency meeting to protect the Republic of Korea from the threat of the North Korean Communist forces and to protect the freedom and happiness of our people.
The outrage was immediate and it was fierce, and within hours, he was forced to walk it back. So since then, he's had his presidential powers stripped away. He's been impeached and charged criminally.
The martial law fiasco is why lawmakers voted to impeach him, giving the Constitutional Court 180 days to decide whether to remove Yoon from office or restore his presidential powers.
And yet, he is clinging to power. So can you set the scene for us? Where is Yoon as of this interview, and what is happening with him?
Well, the entire nation knows exactly where he is, and that is in his official residence. Interestingly enough, after Yoon took power, he made a bold decision to abandon what used to be the official residence of the president, so-called Blue House, and move to an area much closer to the river that bisects the city. And it's up on a hill, former residence of the foreign minister. And you have to remember that right in front of this area is one of the major thoroughfares that connect the southern part of the city to the north. And we've been seeing for the last 2 weeks endless demonstrations by supporters of the president and also the supporters of the opposition, both calling for, removing the president and keeping the president. And it's indeed been incredibly chaotic and hectic in South Korea.
So how is he being protected in this presidential mansion?
Well, it's a compound, and it used to be used for the foreign minister. So you can imagine that it has had very good security for a long time. In fact, there's a fence running behind the villa that has been protected by the military for as long as I can remember. And in addition, we, of course, have the presidential security details on the ground. And what we have also heard is, in fact, soldiers have been deployed to augment the security for him so that nobody can go in without any permission. And that's exactly what we saw when the authorities tried to execute this arrest warrant against him on January 3rd, and they failed.
So this is activating people politically in Korea. There are, as you mentioned, there are protesters calling for Yoon's removal, of course. But we've also seen Yoon supporters taking to the streets, and some are waving U.S. flags, and they're carrying signs in English that are saying, "Stop the steal." This is a direct reference to the 2020 election in the United States.
I set aside my work today thinking about how to prevent this country from heading toward communism, with the determination that even one person coming out can give strength to those who have been guarding this place for days. I decided to come out here today.
What is going on? Why are these signs in English, and why stop the steal?
So to explain that, let me tell you a little bit about the background. South Korea has a very strong military alliance with the US. And of course, South Korea also hosts the biggest US military base outside US soils in Camp Humphreys. And this alliance has been very much valued by South Korean conservatives, more so than by the, let's say, liberal opposition for decades. And whenever there's a political crisis, they immediately pull out this card that the alliance must endure. And to make sure that the alliance will endure, we need to have the right kind of political leadership and the right kind of president in power. And that can, of course, only be conservatives. So from that perspective, what they think is an attack on the current presidency is also an attack on the alliance itself. That's why we are seeing these US flags in the air alongside the flags of South Korea. But at the same time, there's been an underlying argument or political discourse on the ground of South Korea for more than a year, suggesting, and of course perpetrated by the right wing, that the last election was stolen. And this is the election that took place early last year in spring that brought a massive majority for the opposition in parliament. And because of that, Yoon Suk-yeol, the president, has been very much politically contained and marginalized. And that's also what has enabled the impeachment itself on December 14th. And for that reason, they are trying to discredit the very event that brought opposition to power within the legislature.
And so do you get the sense that he really believes that this was stolen, or is this a tactic to avoid accountability?
Well, this is hard to know unless you're really inside the mind of Yoon Suk-yeol. But at the same time, it has not been very well reported that on the day of martial law, the president and his allies sent soldiers, of course, to parliament to stop the lawmakers from trying to lift martial law. But at the same time, in a less developed or less reported story, the soldiers were sent to the, of all places, the Election Commission. And they were taking pictures of the servers stored there. And what has been revealed since then is that, in fact, the president had it in his mind to try and investigate whether there had been any security breach at the Election Commission and to reveal that, in fact, the last election had been manipulated.
So he's facing, just to make sure that we're clear, he's facing accountability here on two fronts. There's the political front, which is the impeachment, but then there's also the criminal front. But these two intersect, right? The reason he doesn't want to come out of his mansion is because he thinks that he'll be arrested while attending his impeachment?
I think it's fair to say that, yes, indeed, he fears being arrested, not least for the fact that this will be the very first time in the history of South Korea where a sitting president would be arrested and taken into custody. So I certainly don't believe that he would want to suffer that shame. But at the same time, yes, he's dealing with enormous political risk at the moment, and the charges that he's facing at the Constitutional Court, as you said, they're both criminal and political. He's being judged for violating the Constitution by trying to interfere with the lawmakers from lifting martial law. But at the same time, he's accused of fomenting insurrection. And that's a criminal charge in South Korea, and from which he's not safe.
Wow. So, I mean, the parallels with incoming U.S. President Donald Trump are not subtle here, right? They are hitting us over the head. President Yoon is facing impeachment and criminal charges, just like Trump did after January 6th. Stop the steal is the Trump playbook, right? But this is not the U.S. and he is not Trump. So what I want to ask you about is, what are the differences here? Do you think Yoon can really avoid accountability by going down this route?
So what he's really vying for is winning more time for himself. Once he and his party, they're very much invested in trying to delay the proceeding as long as possible so that the political calculus can change. And since you bring up Mr. Trump in the US, some actually believe that Yoon is waiting for the inauguration of Donald Trump, because then perhaps the US administration in Washington might intervene and exercise influence over South Korea, and thus helping Yoon to stay in power.
More with Se-Woong after the break. So, Se-Woong, the Corruption Investigation Office said it is preparing for a second attempt on President Yoon. It could be happening hours from now as we speak. Paint us a picture of the standoff and how we got to this point, and maybe what that might look like as they try to arrest him?
Well, I think judging by the events of the last 2 weeks, we're going to see some very intense demonstrations on the streets right in front of the residence. And I mentioned that this is a very important street that connects two parts of the capital, the north and the south. And we have seen traffic being blocked because lanes are being taken over by thousands of demonstrators, waving flags and also just sitting in the cold pavement. This is a very harsh winter in South Korea at the moment. The temperature has gone down to something like -10, -15. At some point, it snowed so heavily that people are wrapping themselves in these silver-colored emergency blankets to try and keep themselves warm. And I would not be surprised if we see a repeat of that same situation. At the same time, of course, the rumor on the street is something we need to take with a grain of salt. But at the same time, enough unofficial sources have indicated that perhaps we're going to see deployment of up to 1,000 police officers trying to storm the compound and try to bring out the president.
And who is it that's actually protecting him? Where does their loyalty lie?
Well, that's an interesting question, right? These are the so-called presidential security details. And at the moment, the president is incapacitated. So therefore, these security guards or officers, they should in fact be serving the acting president, which is at the moment the finance minister. So the fact that they are still on the ground and trying to protect Yoon from carrying out of justice is something that has certainly compounded many people. But at the same time, what has really added drama to the story is that we have soldiers on the ground as well. And we know how important the military was to the carrying out of martial law on December 3rd, as it was in fact the defense minister, acting in conjunction with the president, who tried to command these soldiers and contain the parliament and also storm the election commission. So there are these two camps that we need to watch out for.
Yeah, I still don't really understand. Are these guards loyal to Yoon for ideological reasons, or is it something different?
So in fact, what has been said is that it's not so much the regular officials or officers on the ground, but the leadership of the security detail that have been very much in sympathy toward the president, and they have been acting with disregard toward their own legal responsibilities to try and prevent the warrant from being executed in the first place. And what the authorities have been doing is to put pressure on the security detail itself, saying that if they continue to stand against the police, then they will be charged with obstruction of justice. And some of the leadership also have been called into questioning by not only the police, but also what is called the Office for Investigation of High-Level Corruption. So it seems that these maneuvers have worked to a certain extent in convincing those security detail to stand aside if there is to be another attempt at arresting the president in the next coming hours.
If he is arrested today, how does that change things? Does that mean that he's in jail? Does that mean that he's forced to attend the impeachment?
Yes, I would say he's forced, because he will be sent to one of the pre-trial detention centers in the city of Seoul. He will be questioned by the special investigators based in one of the administrative satellite cities just south of the capital. And perhaps if he's arrested, we will see things moving forward in a more predictable way. But if the authorities fail once again to arrest him, then we're going to have a very interesting situation where the impeachment proceeding against him will continue at the Constitutional Court, while he himself is simply not in attendance.
Wow, what a dramatic week this is going to be in South Korea. As the legal proceedings get underway, what will you be looking out for?
So something I would like to bring up is that even though what Yoon did was really unprecedented and I would say personally unforgivable, Despite that, the support rates, the approval ratings for both him and his party seem to have been going up and not falling.
Wow.
Of course, we need to be a little skeptical toward these numbers because in the recent months, there have been kind of new polling companies emerging in South Korea, and many of them with support from the South Korean right. And they have been clearly working hard to give an impression that the president still enjoys very strong support from his base. But at the same time, one poll result seemed to indicate that the president may have a support rating of as much as 46% in the moment,
Right.
which is on the one hand quite unthinkable, but at the same time, it goes to show to what extent his support and the conservatives are galvanizing and trying to protect the president at any cost.
And isn't that really what this is about? This stop the steal, this invoking of President Trump. This is to bring out negative partisanship, to say, look, what he did, you might not agree with, but you hate the other guys even more.
Yeah, there's certainly truth to that because the priority for the opposition is to try and expedite the current proceedings as much as possible. They want the court to rule. They want the president arrested and charged, and they want a new election, which can only take place 60 days after the Constitutional Court actually says that Yoon Suk-yeol must go. And if there's a quick and fast election, it's bound to be their leader, Lee Jae-myung, who will win that election and become the next president. But at the same time, Lee is such an unpopular figure in South Korea. He has a very strong support from his own base, but at the same time, so many South Koreans simply despise him.
Well, one thing I'm curious about is I know Trump exposed this in the US, but just how much the rule of law depends on norms. And if a leader chooses to ignore those norms, the system doesn't always have answers. Do you feel like that's something we're seeing in South Korea?
I think in South Korea, what we are seeing is how important these norms are and how important it is to safeguard and uphold these norms if democracy is to function. So a very good example of this is the fact that after the president was impeached, Parliament really came to let's say, a very unpleasant realization that the court is simply not equipped to deal with an impeachment motion at this point, because at that time there were only 6 sitting justices on the Constitutional Court and 3 seats were vacant. And this is actually a fault of the parliament for not appointing these 3 judges in time. They were delaying it for a political reason. And after the president was impeached, they realized there need to be at least 6 votes in favor of impeachment on the court. And how do you achieve that when there are only 6 sitting justices on the court? So they were rushing to appoint 3 more. They only succeeded in appointing 2 so far. But if they had actually done their job before martial law, before impeachment, we would not be facing another complication to what is happening.
Yeah. Can this whole thing end with Yoon just staying in power?
It's absolutely possible, right? I mean, there are 8 justices. If 3 will dissent, then impeachment will not be confirmed, or rather, he will not be removed from power. And he will be back to work as before. Of course, it does not change the fact that we're going to see incredibly antagonistic relationship between the legislature and the executive branch for the remainder of his term. He is a lame duck president, and that would not change. And what does it really vote for the whole country when not only South Korea, but it seems like the whole world is on fire and facing so many challenges?
Okay, so as we wrap up, I'm curious where this crisis ranks within South Korean history, which has some violent and dark turns, to be sure. Do you think this is going to be remembered as a wild anomaly or a turning point to a different and more adversarial form of politics?
If we had talked 1 month ago, right in the aftermath of martial law, I would have told you this is unprecedented, this is shocking, but things will move on. But right now, looking at the events of the last 4 or 5 weeks, I simply don't have that optimism anymore. Really, I was in Korea when the previous president, Park Geun-hye, was impeached and removed from power. And at that time, there was still this sense of hope that she did something very clearly wrong. She needs to be removed. There will be an election. Democracy will be restored. This time, I don't really get that feeling. We're going to see prolonged struggle, no matter which way the Constitutional Court rules. If Yoon comes back to power, of course, it's a disaster. But if he's removed, it's not really going to heal this level of division that we're facing in South Korea today.
And that's The Take. We're always listening to what you think of the show. So let us know what kind of episodes you'd like to hear more of and what you thought of this one. We do read the comments, so go ahead and put your thoughts below. We'll check them out.